Sudan's army says it's pulled out of el-Fasher in western Darfur. The region is now said to be under the control of the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. So, how significant is this development? Is there a risk Sudan could break up? And who can stop the dire humanitarian crisis there? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Bernard Smith. For more than 2 years, Sudan has been locked in a bloody conflict between its military and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. And this week, the RSF wrestled control of the strategic city of el-Fasher, the capital of North Darfur, which has been under siege by RSF forces for 18 months. With the group now in control of the Darfur region and the army in charge of the capital Khartoum, is there a risk Sudan could break up? And who will protect the hundreds of thousands of civilians in the line of fire? We'll get to our guests in a moment. First, this report from Alex Baird.
Celebrating what could be a pivotal moment for the conflict in Sudan. Fighters for the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces seize Al-Fashir, the capital of North Darfur. Fierce battles forced the Sudanese army and its allies to retreat from their positions, withdrawing from the city after a 17-month siege by the RSF, which has blocked the entry of all food and humanitarian aid.
We have agreed to withdraw the army from the city of Al-Fashir to a safer location to spare the citizens and the rest of the city from destruction.
The latest gains by the RSF mean the paramilitary group now controls most of Darfur, large parts of Kordofan and a border region near Libya and Egypt. The RSF had already announced a rival administration, and there are fears that could lead to the breakup of Sudan. The conflict began in 2023 after a disagreement on how to integrate RSF forces into the Sudanese army. More than 2 years later, Sudan has become what the UN has described as the world's worst humanitarian and displacement crisis. 30 million people are in urgent need of aid, 12 million have fled their homes, and hundreds of thousands are on the brink of famine, and tens of thousands more have been killed. The fear now is for the 250,000 people in Al-Fashir who are still trapped there.
Just a few minutes ago, reported on a multitude of reports of summary executions of unarmed men and civilians in El-Fasher. The RSF needs to demonstrate respect for international humanitarian law and let those people leave. Alternatively, they need to let us in. And we have asked for that multiple times.
Al Jazeera's fact-checking unit has verified these videos. This one shows RSF fighters taunting a woman believed to be dead. And here, fighters are seen rounding up civilians. The paramilitary group is accused of targeting civilians based on their ethnicity.
The worries are around, what will the continued impact be for hundreds of thousands of people who are living in this area? Will we see those ethnic dimensions of the conflict, which are, very old, decades old, not something that is new, but have resurfaced and really we're seeing now brutally being enacted.
Sudan filed a case at the International Court of Justice in March, accusing the UAE of breaching the Genocide Convention by giving direct support to the RSF, implicating it in genocidal acts in Darfur. Allegations the UAE has firmly denied. For now, RSF fighters continue to celebrate their victories, but reports of mass killings raise the prospect that Sudan's conflict could be entering an even more violent chapter. Alex Baird, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guests. In the Sudanese town of Tawila in North Darfur State is Caroline Bouvard, Country Director of the Sudan Mission of Solidarities International. In Boston, Alex de Waal, Executive Director of the World Peace Foundation. And in Cairo, Dallia Abdelmoneim, political commentator and a former Khartoum resident who was forced to flee. A very warm welcome to you all. I'll start with you, Caroline, just so we understand. Tell us exactly where you are in relation to el-Fasher and what do you know of the conditions inside Al-Fashir at the moment?
Well, I'm currently, as you said, in Tawila, which is a small city about 60 kilometers west of el-Fasher. This is a place where most of the people who have fled el-Fasher in the past months, as well as the Zamzam camp that was attacked in April, have gone to take refuge, because this area is actually under the control of a group called SLAAW that is considered as neutral right now. It is not affiliated either to the RSF or to the regular army. And so that's why many people have been coming here, and that's why we're expecting some displacement with the takeover of el-Fasher by the RSF.
And what do you know about the conditions in Al-Fasher at the moment? What are you hearing?
Well, we can say that now the city has officially fallen. Basically, there are still, from what we hear, some fighting going on in some small areas, but most of the SAF forces have fled the city now. Unfortunately, as you've mentioned in your introduction, there seem to be quite a few abuses and executions going on at the moment within el-Fasher. We know that there was supposed to be still about 250,000 people there, mostly women and children. And we know that some have managed to get out in the past week already, when the fights were intensifying, and in the past 24 to 48 hours. But many are still in there, knowing that they were already in very, very difficult conditions, considering they could not have normal access to food or to water. So we can see it in the first people coming here. They're very in situations of high malnutrition, completely dehydrated, completely traumatized, and many of them are actually as well hurt or sick.
Dallia, we've got an indication of it there from Caroline, but what do you think are the prospects for people, not just in Al-Fasher, but in Darfur, now that the RSF seems to be in full control?
I think we just have to look at the track history of the RSF. Every area that they've been in, they have basically, committed atrocities and crimes. I don't think there'll be anything new. I mean, the government section of the partner of RSF, TASIS, just released a statement saying that the protection of civilians is mandatory, is of their utmost concern. However, the videos, the problem is the RSF films themselves committing these crimes. I've seen so many videos of people just arbitrarily being executed. I'm seeing there's satellite images of dark stains on the ground, which is of the blood of those they've killed. So you cannot hold the RSF to be a fair player, so to speak, in this war, because, like I've said, their history, their tracks show that they do not care. The protection of civilians is not of concern to them. And what's even worse is that a lot of these killings are based along ethnic lines. And Darfur is a mixture of so many different ethnic groups, and some who have been aligned with the RSF, some have been aligned with SAF, and some have been neutral. That doesn't concern them any longer. And the longer we keep getting these empty statements from the likes of the UK, the US, even the United Nations, it means nothing, because no one is being held to account, no one is being held accountable, and no levers have been put into place to hold them accountable. They're acting with immense impunity because they believe they are immune to any form of sanctions.
Alex, do you see that now the RSF has got the prize, if you like, of the control of that part of Sudan? Is there any way of stopping them?
So I think all the warning lights for genocidal massacres are flashing red at this moment. And let us not forget, the Convention on Genocide is the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide. And there is an obligation on all states to act to prevent exactly the type of massacres that we are witnessing in real time at the moment. As Dallia said, the RSF's record on this is absolutely deplorable. It's not as though their political leaders can stand up and say, we are committed to protecting civilians. It's not going to happen. There is no grounds on which we could believe such assurances to be made in good faith. And even if those leaders do mean them, the troops on the ground are not following any such orders. So I think we have to be extremely worried, extremely concerned for the fate of those hundreds of thousands of civilians who have just now fallen under RSF control.
Alex, does it feel like a major shift in the war? What does it mean for the balance of power, you think, in Sudan now?
Well, essentially what we've seen in the last months is we saw the Sudan armed forces consolidate control over Khartoum, the national capital. And now we are seeing the RSF consolidate control over almost all the territory to the west of the Nile. There's still one major city in Kordofan, El Obeid, controlled by the government, which is now encircled and besieged by the RSF. We could see a repeat of the El-Fasher scenario there. But this is a de facto division of Sudan into two. And whether the two sides are ready to negotiate on the basis of this division for some unified government, some sort of power sharing, some sort of federation or confederation remains to be seen, because up to now they have not entered any negotiations in good faith.
And from what you're seeing, Caroline, what do you think of do you think this is a shift in the way in the war? Do you think there's a change in the balance of power now in Sudan?
Well, that's definitely an important step in the war. I mean, El-Fasher, as you mentioned earlier, has been under siege for quite a while. This is a very important city symbolically as well for the RSF, as well as for the SAF, actually. So obviously, this changes the global dynamics, and we will see what comes out of it. But right now, as was mentioned, there is no clear will on any side to actually sit down and discuss what could be the outcome of the conflict. There are still fighting going on in the Kordofan around El Obeid, as was mentioned, and it's just one more step basically in a war where we've seen one side moving forward and the other one backward for a while, and some shifts that nobody could predict at some point, back and forth over the past 2 years. So I wouldn't bet on what is going to come up right now. And as a humanitarian NGO, our focus is actually on responding to the needs of the people on the ground. And we will see, according to the context that comes out of here, how we can do that the best as we can.
All right, Dallia, Alex just touched on it there, but do you think there is now a risk of an effective de facto partition of of Sudan, excuse me?
Well, I mean, it is de facto partition. It has been the case for a while now. But the issue is that does this region need another Libya on its borders? And I think the U.S. envoy Bullis emphasized in a recent interview that they do not want that. And I don't think even our neighbors, the likes of Egypt, would want that. However, the idea that the RSF will be content by controlling the western region of Sudan is, I think, a bit simplistic, because by capturing al-Fashir, they have a direct route to the northern states and to Kordofan. And if anything, they tend to regroup and then relaunch their attacks again. So I don't think the RSF nor their the military leaders will be content with just controlling the western part of the Sudan. And most probably they will launch more attacks. And already there have been reports of several towns, of several areas already being being besieged, being bombed, being attacked by the RSF. So this de facto partition, that's the case for now. But unless there's a major move to de-escalate, this war will continue and these violations will continue, and the RSF will not be content with just controlling the western area.
Alex, how much of a threat do you think the RSF is to the rest of Sudan?
So I think this really depends upon the backers of the RSF and indeed the Sudan armed forces on the other side, because neither of these belligerents are waging the war with their own resources. Each of them is backed by an external patron. So in the case of the RSF, it's the United Arab Emirates. I should say they deny it, but all the evidence is they are backing them to the hilt. And in the case of SAF, it's Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, and others, not invested to the same degree, but certainly leaning in that direction. And what is needed, the first step that is needed to stop this is to get the external patrons to sit down and say, we will not support the continuation of this war by all means. Because if that were to happen, then the money, the drones, the other military equipment that is enabling this destructive war to go on would not be available, and the two sides would be pressed to begin to talk peace.
Alex, it was only on September 25th that the Quad, Egypt, South Africa, the UAE and the US met in Washington, D.C. I mean, they were trying to establish a 3-month ceasefire. It seems they've not been able to do it. And we also understand that there were representatives from the RSF and the SAF on the sidelines there as well. What's come out of that? Where can that go from there?
So those parties, I should say, it's Saudi Arabia is the fourth member, along with Egypt, the UAE, and the US. They were meeting in Washington until this last weekend, convened by the US Special Envoy Masad Boulos. They were not able to agree. There is, in principle, they have mapped out a plan which has a humanitarian truce, a ceasefire, political negotiations, leading in theory to a civilian government. That is the overall plan, and I don't think anyone would disagree with that plan. But the UAE and Egypt in particular will not come to common terms, and the UAE, we are told, pulled out of the last round of talks, specifically on the issue of there being a ceasefire around al-Fasher. So the UAE clearly has ambitions for pushing the RSF towards something bigger than simply controlling Darfur and simply freezing the battle lines where it is. And to get these three external players, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, to come to a common position, only the United States is in a position to do that. And we're not seeing enough leverage coming in from the US at the moment.
Dallia, who do you think can put pressure on the UAE, on the Egyptians, to come back around the table and bring the parties together?
Washington. Unfortunately, there's no other party that holds political sway over both Egypt and the UAE. But unfortunately, whether it was the Biden administration or the Trump administration, there's been a distinct lack of political will to bring an end to this war. If they wanted to, they could. But the UAE is an economic, political and security partner to the likes of the United States and the United Kingdom. I mean, there was just a report released today that British-produced arms were sold to the UAE, which was then passed on to the RS-7, which has been used in al-Fasher. So it's too lucrative. The UAE is too lucrative, too big a partner to be given to be given a telling off or to be told to stop. And we've been saying this since the war erupted. This is not something new. This is something that has been documented, stated, and said so many times, but nothing has been done. And, if it means, the city of al-Fashir had 1.5 million civilians last year. Today, now we're talking about, 170,000, 250,000, and nothing's been done. And unfortunately, I don't think anything will be done simply because the amount of political sway and political power that the UAE holds. So unless something happens major that will allow Washington to turn around and say, stop it, nothing will. But at the same time, without the US, nothing will be done.
All right, we'll come back to Washington's role in a second. But Caroline, with access routes to al-Fasher blocked, what are the biggest operational challenges that you and your colleagues are facing at the moment?
Well, at the moment, there are two different of challenges, actually. On one side, there is the capacity of response where the people are being displaced, because, as we mentioned, many people have been displaced in not only in the past weeks, but in the past months. Here in Tawila, we have 500,000 people who have been coming here in the past 6 months. So you can imagine the consequences in terms of trying to support them. They arrived with nothing. And in a town that was originally about 30,000 people. So there's no access to water, the food is scarce, and the shelter is just minimalistic, as you can imagine. So that's the first point. And we are now expecting to have more people coming in from el-Fasher, and they will most probably go to Tawila, as mentioned, because this is the safest place. They are also going to other directions, but in smaller numbers. And then the other question is, how do we access the people who do not manage to come to Tawila? Because what we're getting from the people who have been arriving in the past couple of days is that they have less people on the road, and we cannot access the road right now. Because we know that some of the militias affiliated to RSF are basically ransoming the people who are on the road and killing and raping those who cannot pay for their safe passage. And unfortunately, many people who are trying to get out of el-Fasher to reach a safe place in places like Tawila, they stay stuck on the road because of their personal capacities to move, or because of the intervention of these militias. So these are the two main challenges that we face. We need more supplies for the people who are already here, and for those who will eventually come. And we need to get safe access to the population on the road all the way to el-Fasher and in el-Fasher eventually.
Alex, Dallia was saying just before that it's Washington that is key to bringing the parties together in this conflict. Donald Trump has been casting himself as the role of international peacemaker recently. Is there enough interest in Washington that might help bring at least a ceasefire to this crisis? Is the Trump administration that engaged, do you think?
It is at least engaged. At least it has taken the first step that the Biden administration did not take, which is having a senior envoy who can have access to the highest levels of the Arab governments to take a lead in this, which was what the Biden administration signally failed to do. So that's a step in the right direction. However, there are no real commercial or strategic American interests in Sudan. There's no profit for the Trump White House in Sudan. That's because Sudan was under sanctions for decades, so no American companies are invested there. So if the Trump administration is to move on this, it has to move with the type of motivation that we haven't seen impel it into action up to now, which is really a humanitarian motivation. It has to be moved by the fact that there are millions of people in dire need, an entire country that is hungry and falling apart, thousands starving to death. And that impulse for ending human suffering is really what should be moving the world, but up to now isn't doing so.
Dallia, what are the potential knock-on effects in the rest of the region, particularly in the Horn of Africa, from this?
I mean, already there's tension in Eritrea and Ethiopia, so that's one thing. Or the influx of, displaced and refugees crossing into borders will also add pressure to countries that already are suffering economically and socially and politically as well. And like I said, the western side of Sudan is very much open borders. And so you have so much mix of ethnic groups who already have lineage or ties to groups in other countries on the western side of Sudan. So can you imagine if, let's say, one tribe decided to, the consequences, the fallout would be catastrophic. And it already is bad. How many Sudanese citizens are refugees in other countries? I am one of them. I may not be a refugee technically by all terms, but I did cross border and I'm now in Egypt, and I'm one of millions. And so I can just imagine the longer this war goes on and the longer people are seeking safety, which they cannot find, they will be forced to cross borders and adding more to an already overburdened economic and social setup in neighboring countries, which they themselves have their own issues. And to add on top of that, refugees who need help, who need access to safety, to healthcare, it's a nightmare.
So, Caroline, how are neighbouring governments and communities, as far as you know, coping with the influx of refugees and the increased insecurity at the moment?
Well, it's an obvious problem, and it does indeed lead to some additional instability in some areas. So if I take the example of Chad is actually key to access the Darfur and be able to bring aid to the Darfur. And right now, you've got about 1 million refugees in Chad that have been coming from Darfur, from different areas in the Darfur. They are benefiting from some humanitarian aid, but it doesn't attract as much the attention of donors as actually the Sudan side of the conflict. And so they actually would need more aid because it brings some tensions within the Chadian government. When we, as humanitarian working in the Darfur, for example, have to cross Chad, have to ask for authorizations for visa, have to bring aid through Chad, and they're not getting anything from this in return, if I may say it this way, for the people who have actually seek refuge in their own country. So that's a big issue for sure.
All right. And Alex, what might an effective international response look like at this stage, given that previous mediation efforts haven't worked?
Well, I think, first of all, there needs to be an enormous increase in the humanitarian response. The UN appeal is just 25% funded. The assistance to local community groups, emergency response rooms in Sudan is incredibly meager. But I think the plan, the overall American plan of a ceasefire, humanitarian access and political talks, beginning with the Arab neighbors, that is the way forward. It has to be pressed forward.
OK, well, thanks to all our guests, to Caroline Bouvard, to Alex de Waal and to Dallia Abdelmoneim. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. We are at AJ Inside Story. From me, Bernard Smith, and the entire team here, bye for now.